Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the webcast, Unlocking Employee Potential, How Managers Enable High Performance. This webcast is sponsored by Bonusly. This webcast has been pre-approved for HRCI and SHRM credit. Please be sure to attend the complete webcast in order to receive your credits. You will receive an email from hr.com within 2 business days. It will include the certification credit information. You may also log into your account and view the credits that you have received. If you have any questions during the webcast, click on Q&A in your webinar controls and type them in. And now it's my pleasure to turn it over to our moderator, David Brown.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kathy. And hello, everyone from hr.com. We are so excited to be here today with you all. It's our first event with hr.com for the year, and just really excited about the topic today. For those of you who have never been in a webinar with us, we do like to do ours Q&A style. So we have 2 of my friends and colleagues here that we've planned about 6 or 7 questions to go over the topic, just to really answer the hot button topics surrounding this. But we also love our webinars to be engaging. So if you have any thoughts, please feel free to put them in the chat. Let us know what you think. And also, like Kathy mentioned, feel free to use that Q&A. We'll have some time at the end to go over any questions that may come up during the webinar. So please use that box for that. And with that, I would love to introduce our speakers. And so, like I said, my name's David. I'll be moderating the conversation today. I'm calling in from Florida, Jacksonville to be specific, where it's just now starting to feel like winter with it being around 60 degrees today. And we'll start with you, Alessandra. But just let us know where you're calling in from. Let us know what your title is here at Bonusly, and then your favorite thing about the winter.
Yeah, I'm calling in from Brimfield, Colorado, which is like right outside of Boulder. I'm in the suburbs. I'm a user researcher at Bonusly, so I do a lot of our research and inform kind of what we want to build for people who use our product. And my favorite thing about winter is the fall leading up to it and the spring coming out of it. I think probably my absolute favorite thing is like being able to be cozy and just like bundled up and feel that like warm embrace of a nice winter coat.
I'm Namaste. I am in Western Colorado in a little mountain town called Paonia, and I'm an engineering manager here at Bonusly, leading new product development. And my favorite thing about winter is just stepping outside and having that like cold crispness and absolute silence. There's nothing else quite like it. When everything is still, everything is silent, it's cold, it's a beautiful moment.
I love it. And thank you everyone for all your thoughts in the chat. We had one person reach out to us via the host and panelists. So I just want to remind everyone, the chat on Zoom is a little tricky sometimes. So just make sure you flip it to everyone so that way everyone can hear what you're saying. Because this person said that they got 101 inches of snow this year in Alaska, which is mind-blowing to me from Florida. But like I said, we are really excited about today's topic, which is on unlocking employee potential and how managers really enable high performance. And so, as you all know, the theme for today's event is new tools and trends and topics for performance management. And so we just want to talk to you all today just about sort of our thoughts around performance management and really how we strongly believe how performance enablement is really going to become the new performance management. And so we'll kick it off with the first question, and we'll start with you, Namaste. But what are the main shortcomings of the traditional performance management process?
Well, I think probably the first and most obvious one is pretty much everybody hates it. I don't know about you. As a manager, I find it difficult. And then as somebody who's being managed as well, there's a lot of uncertainty going into it. Not always sure exactly how it's going to come out. And it's a lot of work to prepare that doesn't always feel particularly productive. It can feel very performative. Like I need to show and present a lot of evidence and make a case for how I might have performed. In a lot of cases, I don't remember what happened 3, 6, 12 months ago, depending on the cycle time. So overall, it's kind of like, it feels like a necessary evil in the processes that we go through at work. But it often doesn't feel particularly helpful. I think in the best cases, I can feel seen, I can feel validated. But when that happens, it's usually quite a lot of work that goes in behind the scenes to make that the case. So yeah, not very much fun in general, and it's pretty disruptive, a lot of effort to do it well.
Definitely. I think another piece of it is how infrequent they happen at many orgs. Like a lot of orgs are doing performance reviews once a year, and that's because they're so burdensome, like you say, Namaste. So that infrequency makes us have a lot of recency bias on like what we're looking at. We're thinking about the last couple months instead of the full year. And that makes it a bit hard to look at things with some objectivity, and it includes a lot of subjectivity in these performance reviews with that bias. And then when we're looking behind, we're also thinking about what happened in the past and not really what we're doing in the future. So I think a lot of employees will often say like, I feel bad that I did it wrong already. I don't want to dwell on that. I want to learn what I can do in the future to do it right the next time. So that backwards looking is kind of like looking in a foggy rearview mirror of like whatever you can remember of what happened. And then there's also that like one-way street aspect of it, of like as a manager, you're often delivering feedback to employees, and they're not really playing an active role of like owning their performance and where they want it to go, and where they see themselves in the future. So that can be nerve-wracking and anxiety-inducing for a lot of people, especially if our performance reviews are used to make decisions on promotions or your pay. It could feel a little bit unfair that you're just kind of looking back at the performance. You're really remembering those last 3 months rather than the full year. And it's hard to bring out all of like those proof points of everything else that you've done that really made you a competent employee for the rest of the year. So yeah, these points up here are great points of like them feeling too rigid, creating some competition even of like people within teams feeling like they need to compete with each other to have that top performance when we really should be working together as a team. And then that employee turnover, those negative feelings definitely come through, and they just don't feel great. So it's bad for morale in the end. That's what those traditional performance reviews might have some shortcomings on.
I think one question that comes up is like, in a performance review, have you ever thought to yourself, wow, or said it out loud, I really would have liked to have known that earlier?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or maybe, I don't agree with this assessment in one way or another. So I think it's hard to build that alignment with this type of delay, these long cycle times.
Totally agreed. Nothing worse than getting feedback on something you did 3 months ago. Not even
Right.
remembering what happened.
Yes. And I totally agree. And I think one of the terms that comes to mind when you all were talking is recency bias, which is so true when it comes to performance reviews. And definitely resonate with what you all said about how, and even in the chat, how it really is right now all about looking backwards. There's not much planning ahead or goal setting, or like this last point says, goal focused. And so totally agree. And I know one of my friends I know had a performance review recently, and it was pretty much the review was handed down from someone else, and the person giving the review really had no context on what the review was. And so, like you were saying, Namaste, like if someone has questions or wants to talk further about it, that there's really no place for that in the current system, which is a really big shortcoming. Um, and so the second question, let's start with you, Alessandra. How can performance enablement empower employees take charge of their own growth and development?
Yeah, I think the number one thing that comes to mind is this concept of intrinsic motivation, right? So when you're enabling somebody's performance and they're really taking ownership of their growth, of their development, and then they can tap into what we all have called intrinsic motivation, which is like our intrinsic desires to do the things that we do. For example, I'll use myself. I'm a user researcher. I'm an anthropologist by training. I just have a deep curiosity for uncovering the way people work. And when I'm able to tap into that deep curiosity and use it to like motivate the things that I do at work and also my growth and development at work in my career, then it's like a supercharger for your employees, right? Because now they're not doing things because they're getting paid or because their manager told them to. They're doing it because they're actually genuinely curious, genuinely want to do this, and that drives them to do it with a really high level of performance. So getting that initiative and that drive from that employee from tapping into their intrinsic motivation by giving them like the opportunity to take charge of their growth and development. And you do that through enabling their performance, not necessarily like managing it, right? Like it's that slight distinction of like telling somebody what to do versus giving them the tools of like letting them get to there. I think another thing is like this shift from management is like management, we often think of like judgment. We're being judged on what we've done. We're being managed to be a certain way, whereas growth gives you that freedom to really like express how you want to express that growth. Like, am I really curious about doing deep research? Do I prefer to learn from other people? What kind of learning methods do you learn best with? And then using that to enable yourself to grow and learn and therefore perform at a high level. So being able to do all of that just fosters this culture of learning. And if companies can encourage that culture of learning and continue to foster that culture of learning, they're really like helping employees take charge of their growth and development. And so that culture of learning is a lot about how you can enable performance.
Yeah, I think you said that really well, Alessandra. I don't know that there's much to add there other than emphasizing that with performance management, we just identified it feels very top down. And with performance enablement, what comes to mind for me is like you're collaborating on performance. You're empowering people to own their performance and their growth, and then you're supporting them in that on a continuous basis. So it's keying in on that management, taking power away from somebody, and enablement, empowering somebody to own their own performance and their growth. And I think at the end of the day, we all love growing and learning and becoming better versions of ourselves, but we have to feel like that's something that's understood, that's aligned on, that we know what that next goal looks like, and we're getting feedback on how we're progressing towards it. And then that becomes a very rewarding experience. And so if we can bring that online, it's good for everybody. And then people's performance improves. And then that performance review at the end of the year is a lot better and a lot less of a surprise. So it's that sense of like taking power back in terms of my own growth and development.
Yeah, totally agreed. And I love what Jarrett just put in the chat about doing these monthly performance evaluations where the employee really owns 50% of that input of the goals. That's a really like my opinion is that's a very enabling performance approach to doing these evaluations because you're putting a lot of ownership in that employee. Like Namaste said, like enabling is all about that ownership and like giving the tools to the employee to be able to take charge of their growth. So I love that you're doing that, Jarrett. Keep at it.
Yes, I love that. Even going back to what you all said in sort of the first question, where it's when you get to the performance review, it's a lot of times the employees are blindsided, and so having these, especially like constant conversations with the person's manager, it helps sort of like know where you're at right now, where you're at this month, where you should be at next month, like certain goals and like how to get to those goals. And it's not like everyone keeps saying this like big surprise at the end of the year or during the performance review where nothing's really been communicated up until then. And so I will call out these few stats that we'll definitely share after the webinar with you all. But with traditional performance reviews, only 21% of employees feel like their performance metrics are within their control, which really goes to show you like employees really don't feel empowered or even helped by the way that the traditional process is. And another crazy stat that we see is that 96% of employees said that they wanted timely feedback, and not just in the performance review and not just once or twice a year, but timely. And we see that again and again. And we'll definitely talk about that more coming up in this discussion. But we'll move along to the next question, Namaste, and we'll start with you. But what are some strategies that managers can use to inspire top performance in a performance enablement framework? And just for context for everyone, we're starting with Namaste for this one because he is a people manager here at Bonusly, and I will say one of the best. And so I'm really excited just to see what Namaste say about this.
David blowing some smoke, but so I do my best. I'll put it that way. Yeah, I think one of the strategies I've found very powerful is to lean into an approach that David Marquette describes in the book Turn the Ship Around. And basically, it's focusing on building a team of leaders. Everybody on the team is a leader and they lead in their own way. And this may seem somewhat adjacent to performance enablement framework specifically, but it's very much aligned with that idea of empowering people to make decisions about their work. And specifically, this idea that once somebody knows the outcome, the objective that we're pulling towards, then they have a much better sense of what it takes to do it and to do it well. And so if you move decision making close to where the work is, then somebody can own more of that holistic understanding of what good work looks like. And then my role as a manager becomes much less of telling people what to do and when, and much more of, hey, have you thought of this thing? Or that sounds great, or let's work on this together. And then that creates lots of organic opportunities for feedback, for just understanding better and better how a person works, how the team works, what the forces in the system at play are that sets up somebody for high performance or not. And so we can take our everyday work as a exercise in maximizing our performance individually and as a team. And if we keep that focus together and we're checking in on it continuously, that becomes performance enablement in action.
I love that. Yeah, building on that, this idea of like clear and collaborative goals, like really working together to set these goals that leverage that intrinsic motivation that I mentioned, and like work on what you're excited about working on so that you can maximize that impact to your performance. And I think there's even an aspect of like a coaching mindset. Like as a manager, it's really hard because you have multiple reports, right? You can't necessarily mentor all of them to have these like growth paths, but you can incorporate some coaching mindset and not mentoring them, but facilitating their growth by asking them the questions that, the big questions of like, why do you do what you do? And then focusing on that development in the future. Again, looking forward at your performance rather than backwards definitely helps to create that idea of like, I want to be a top performer, so here's what I can do in the future, rather than focusing on what have I done wrong in the past. I think a big aspect that we have in like Bonusly and in the way that we think about enabling performance is this idea of like really personalizing, understanding, and communicating thoroughly with your reports. Being able to personalize like your interactions with them and your goals together and all of that really helps you build trust and build a safe space, a space with psychological safety, so that you can have employees who feel comfortable coming to you and talking to you about their growth and also what they can do to get there. It's really hard to have a candid conversation about your weaknesses and be vulnerable about the things that you feel like you struggle on if you don't feel safe with your manager. And Namaste, like you do this really, really good at Bonusly. So I think you could probably even share a couple of things that you do there. But all about that like connection that you have with somebody that really drives helping them reach their performance goals.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Alessandra. Like that safety, that relationship, that becomes the foundation of being able to be honest and vulnerable with each other. And nobody grows or improves by staying comfortable and staying safe. It's when we step out of our comfort zone. It's when we lean into constructive feedback or difficult situations. That's when we grow. And the growth, sometimes it's painful, sometimes it hurts. And so what carries us through that? And A lot of it is a mindset of service, like both as the person being managed. Why am I here? I'm here to help the team. I'm here to help the business. I am growing in service of this outcome that we share as an organization. And then as a manager, I am in service to each person, to the team, and to the organization. So we have the same goals, we have the same objectives. And if we center our relationship around my job is to set you up for success and to be a champion of your success, and that is believed and understood, even if we may not get along in other ways, like that's something we can rally around and we can work together towards, and it benefits everybody. So finding those common threads that tie us together and leaning into those creates an environment of safety and collaboration that allows this hard work to happen.
Yeah. And I think there's like hard work and then there's easy work too, right? Like
Sure. Yeah.
celebrating people's wins, recognizing them for the good things they've done, like saying, you're doing this really well, keep doing it. Those are easy things to do to keep encouraging that high performance. And, you're setting clear expectations on like, this is good behavior, like something we want to see often. And then that employee knows, like, I can continue to repeat this. And then also have those supplemental things of like the hard conversations of where you can improve. So definitely rewarding, recognizing, and just celebrating your employees for the good things that they do.
100%.
I love that. And the entire time I was thinking about my manager here at Bonusly, and one of the really big times that we have to really build that sort of trust in each other and set goals and expectations and everything is in our weekly one-on-ones. And we have like a template that we use. We go through sort of the first few minutes are just catch up, how's life, anything fun happened this weekend, anything fun coming up. And then we sort of just jump into like, what are the goals for this week? Anywhere I can help you? And that template that we use is just super helpful. And it's one thing that we'll also share after this webinar with you all, just like a one-on-one template that managers can use when they meet with their direct reports, whether it's weekly, monthly, no matter the cadence. But that definitely is one of those times where my manager and I can really talk through all this, build that trust, and set really those goals. And so I really like how you both mentioned that. So this next question we really sort of hinted at in the first couple of questions. And it really is around coaching. So like we said, a lot of times the feedback and the goal setting and all really only happens in the performance reviews. So what are some ways that managers can address the coaching needs between the formal performance cycles? And we'll start with you, Alessandra.
Yeah, cool. I think one of the things is like micro coaching. So this concept of coaching is huge, right? You're thinking about this big endeavor of like helping somebody get to their goals. But if you think of it as like micro coaching, little bits and pieces of coaching, like David, you said, in one-on-ones, check-ins about progress, then feedback really plays into this of like specific tasks, even like just helping that employee brainstorm a solution to something that's challenging can be a really quick and efficient way to help coach between those performance cycles. And then when you're able to do that, you're really creating these open channels of communication, right? So you're providing a lot of guidance to your employees, but you're also giving them multiple outlets. Do I have a weekly one-on-one where I know I can bring up any challenges? But do we also have maybe a Slack check-in at the beginning and end of the week where we can like express if we're blocked on anything? And in that like vein, using the technology that you have to like manage that, like for example on Bonusly, like we do recognition, and so when you're being recognized for things that you're doing well, you're getting that feedback loop as well. And then I think there's a couple of other things, just like encouraging that self-directed learning, like giving people explicit permission to take the time to learn something sometimes helps them know that they can. Even though you might think they don't need permission, they might feel like they do. And then just celebrating those people when they do something like that, so that you can continue to like celebrate their growth. And then just being proactive in like, what do you need from me? How can I help? How can I, gauge how you are between these performance cycles so that I can help guide you in a direction. And I think, Namaste, you have this great analogy about what it looks like to help guide somebody in a certain direction within the context of work.
Yeah, and sometimes like coaching doesn't need to be hands-on. So one of the models that a mentor shared with me earlier on in my career, and I think a lot of people are familiar with this, is like a box. And if you think about somebody's work role and responsibility, the box defines what that space looks like. And if that box is, oh, I'm doing the auto thing at Made of Hearts, so we might get some more of those on accident. But if the box is really small, that's micromanagement. We all know what that feels like. There's hardly any room to move, hardly any autonomy. It generally feels terrible and is largely recognized as a poor management technique, and ideally never needs to be used. So that'd be a really tiny box. If there's no box at all, do you even have a job? What is your role and responsibility? We've probably had some experience of that as well in our careers where I'm not always sure what I should be working on or what my lane is and somebody else's. And that can also be a very difficult space to be in. So it's really helpful to have a box that's not too big and not too small that defines what my role and responsibilities are. And basically managers help to define what that box looks like. And then the coaching comes in terms of how somebody's doing to navigate within that box and fulfill their role. Now, what if you take away one of the sides of the box and now you have a three-sided box? And what if the objective you're after, maybe it's a little fuzzy, but it's up here. And so you don't want somebody going over here and you don't want somebody going over there, over there. They'd bounce off the side of the box if they did so. They'd get feedback that they weren't fulfilling their duties or their role. But as long as they're traveling in that direction, they have autonomy, they have freedom, it feels great. And then a really powerful thing is to plant a magnet up there. So there's a magnet that pulls somebody in that direction and three sides to the box to keep them on track. And that magnet, I think Jarrett's saying, providing like purpose, direction, motivation. What is that thing we're trying to accomplish? What is our goal? If everybody knows what that is, if I know what that is for my role, that's a magnet that pulls me forward. It might be a milestone coming up a day, a week, or a month from now. It might be an overall objective, but that magnet pulls me forward. And then the thought that's been coming up a lot in my mind lately from a coaching perspective is being a gardener. And so there's times where, I need to till the soil and plant the seed and create the conditions for a plant to thrive. But once that's done, the best thing I can do is step back and leave it alone. Make sure it gets a little bit of water, make sure it's getting sunshine, weed it out. But if I'm like messing with it every day, I'm trying to pull it up to get it to grow faster or, like grow this way a little bit. Sometimes all of those interventions actually are unhelpful. So kind of knowing when coaching is needed and when to let people learn from experience and just run and then check in periodically and be like, hey, you know what, that was great, good job, or maybe try this. But a constant hands-on approach isn't always needed or helpful.
Yeah, totally agree with that. I think this image does a good job of showing too, like some things you can do, like step by step to fix performance management if it's not hitting the mark at your org, by facilitating that feedback throughout the year. I think like when we think about like that gardening analogy, maybe some of that water is creating feedback loops where you're consistently providing timely and specific and actionable feedback on what to do. And you're discussing this and you have that open communication. And then you're just helping them align on those goals so that you can help get them there. I think this image does a great job of like showing you step by steps, but also like these analogies of like how you can view your employees and yourself as like these symbiotic things that work together rather than working against each other.
Totally. And I love that analogy, Namaste, about being a gardener. And it's so applicable. As you can see behind me, I love plants. But it is one of those things where if you sit there and stare at it and mess with it and force it to grow, like it's not going to. Everything grows at its own pace and its own time. But it's also in the sense of you can't just once a year check in and be like, oh, is it growing? Should I do this? Should I do that? But it's finding like this image says, like sort of finding like what each person specifically needs, what their coaching needs are, what their goals are, and how you can align, how you can help and support with what they need. So really love that analogy. And like we mentioned, feedback is popping up a lot nowadays. We're starting to see it in sort of what employees are really wanting. We're starting to see it in a lot of different aspects. And so when we're talking about enabling performance, what role does feedback play in that, and how does it contribute to the employee's growth and development? We'll start with you, Namaste.
Feedback's huge. One of the things that I think of around feedback is it shows that somebody cares and somebody's paying attention. So if somebody will take the time to give me feedback, even if that feedback, whether it's positive, like, hey, you're doing something great, or constructive, you could have done this better, or that was you really flubbed that one. It's an invitation to engage in conversation and better understanding. And it shows that they're paying attention and they care about the work you're doing. Your work is seen and noticed. And those are both very important, very validating experiences that increase my engagement. The other one is that we all have blind spots. Like, we don't know how we're seen by others. We have our own self-assessment of how we're doing, how our work is, but it's only one piece of the picture. Everybody has their own perspectives, their own experiences, and that's super valuable to bring to bear, whether it's trying to accomplish some project or some goal, or the project and goal of being the best version of myself. So I depend on feedback to continuously improve, to continuously grow, and I need it from everybody. I need it from the people on my team, from my peers, from my managers and other senior leaders. And then also, when that feedback happens, it encourages other people to engage in feedback as well. It helps create some of that safety and some of that connection, some of that sense of belonging. So it's kind of the fuel that makes the whole system go. Like, it's absolutely essential.
I couldn't agree with that more. Yeah, I think like just on that micro scale, feedback helps us identify our strengths and weaknesses, right? Like, where can I do better? Where am I doing well? And it also sets those clear expectations and goals. It creates that box, right? So when you're getting feedback on what you're doing,
Yeah.
it's like creating the walls on that box to guide you towards that magnet that you're planting. It also just really promotes that accountability and ownership of, hey, I'm responsible for getting feedback on how I work because I'm accountable for my actions and the things that I do and the results that I get here. And again, it's that ability to course correct before you reach that yearly review where you're like, what, 6 months I've been doing this wrong? If I had gotten feedback 6 months ago, I would have stopped doing this wrong that long ago. And then you can definitely course correct and get to where you want to be and feel like a competent employee, which is really important. Namaste, we've talked often about between us the self-determination theory, which is a theory of human motivation, which basically says that as humans, we need three things in order to feel motivated and do well in our roles. And that's relatedness, so relationships with other people, competence, so knowing what we're doing well, and autonomy, so having that opportunity to do things in the way that we need to do things. And being able to get feedback helps you know where you're competent and also builds that relatedness with other people because you have that trusting relationship to get that feedback. And then it also gives you that autonomy to build the 3 box walls, and give you that freedom to achieve your goals in the way that you need to or want to achieve those goals. So feedback really provides a lot of like accountability for the employee, but also guidance as a manager to getting the employee to where you need them to be.
So speaking of feedback, I know it's going to be the topic for the next little bit, and we will have a question about sort of the steps to give proper feedback. But continuous feedback. Let's talk about that for a little bit. We'll start with you, Namaste. But can you explain how continuous feedback differs from annual performance reviews and why it's essential for fostering this culture of performance enablement? And also, if one of you wants to touch on sort of our view at Bonusly with how feedback is positive, negative, and how we really relate sort of recognition as a source of feedback.
Yeah, so Bonusly as a platform for giving recognition is positive feedback. Recognition tells me when I did something that positively impacted others. And I think, as Alessandra said earlier on, like, knowing what we're doing well is a huge part of the puzzle. That tells me like, cool, keep doing that. That's working. Make sure you don't lose that while you're pursuing other opportunities to improve in other ways. So feedback's effective when it's specific and it's timely. And so one of the big issues with feedback through performance management cycles, as we talked earlier, is it's so far disconnected from the event. You might not even remember the event in the same way anymore. And unless you have like, what is it? Is it the State Farm commercials? I can't remember what product it is, but like it's football. Like they throw the red flag, like, oh, you forgot to pack the thing for the trip. And then, let's watch the replay. And oh, nope, you're right. I did forget. Like we don't remember things the same way. And unless you have a recording device and you go back and look at it, it's hard to know. So when feedback is timely, there's a chance to have that shared experience, that shared understanding of what happened to build that. And then that's what you can mine for the growth opportunity, for the learning. And then also you have the chance to act on it. So if feedback is important and there's something that I can do better in some way or another, the sooner I know that, the sooner I can make that improvement and that'll show up. So every moment that goes by without that feedback given is a missed opportunity. So continuous is really the key thing for feedback.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. I feel like the difference between that continuous feedback and that annual performance review is like a shift in your performance management mindset, right? Like when you're shifting that mindset to this continuous loop, you're really enabling people a lot more. I think like if you imagine you just got your dream job, you're really excited about something, you work in that position for a year, and then your performance review comes around, you're like a Corvette with a blurry rear view mirror, right? Like you are this high performance car, you can achieve great things. And then you're looking behind through this like blurred view of like this subjective bias, like process that we've already talked about how performance reviews that are yearly can fail. And then when you're looking at continuous feedback, it's more like giving that Corvette a GPS, a place to go, like a know-how on how to get there, and a really easy way to navigate improvement in real time. And Katie, I love this idea of like areas of opportunity. Yes, improvement might have a negative connotation, so can weaknesses. And I think like as we like navigate these conversations, we want to choose our language delicately to make sure that it lands really well with the receiver. But having just the practice of creating that continuous feedback, then you're also like creating this space and this opportunity in your org where if something is a weakness, then it's not so embarrassing or vulnerable to identify it because there's a path forward to fix it because you have the support of those around you who are giving you feedback and tools and action items to get to that place. So it really kind of demystifies this idea of like, how do I get to where I want to be when you have these continuous feedback loops? And that just makes you feel like you're able to achieve anything. And when you feel empowered to do that, you're more likely to do that. So that continuous feedback being timely and relevant, as you said, Namaste, just really helps course correct and get to that place where you want to be.
I love it. And even just looking at these slides, these are pulled from uh, a blog post that we have actually sort of on ways to give and receive feedback. And I think, like we talked about earlier, a lot of it really does start with trust, like if you are giving the feedback or receiving the feedback, like it has to be started with that ground of trust. So that way, if the manager gives the feedback, the employee, knows it comes from a nice place. It comes from a great place and a place where your manager really wants the best for you and is trying to help you achieve these goals. And then I think one of the really great parts of this is when feedback is given properly, it should be motivating. And that's because it's digestible, straightforward, and implementable. It's not this crazy thing that your manager is telling you. But then I think from the manager standpoint, which is really kind of where Bonusly comes in, is really it's so important to recognize when you notice improvements. Like if you notice someone taking steps to improve and to do better shortly after the performance review, you don't wait until the next performance review to tell them. And so that's where recognition really plays a huge piece in this. And this is one of our last questions. So like Kathy mentioned in the chat, if you all have any questions, use that Q&A box We'll probably have around 5 or 10 minutes or so to go over any questions you all have for the speakers. But the next question is about feedback again. And so Namaste and Alessandra have done lots of research lately on feedback and the role it plays. So what are the key ingredients of impactful feedback, and how can those listening implement those in practice, especially for those who are people managers or trained people managers? And we'll start with
Do you
you,
want
Alessandra. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. I think with continuous feedback, some of the ingredients you can use, which I think we've mentioned, but to reiterate, is that it's continuous, right? You're having frequent loops of feedback. They're timely to what you're doing, and they're specific about what you're doing right, what are areas of opportunity. It's also looking forward. One of our customers actually said to us that they don't think of it as feedback, they look at it as feed forward. So let's not dwell on what I've done wrong. Let's think about what I can do in the future to make my processes and our work be even better. And then it's really largely around having, I think, that personalization of like, I know what your goals are and how to get you there, and I have that relationship with you, so it can be that effectiveness, because it lands the way that you want it to land with the receiver, because you know them well and you have that connection. I think like another thing is this positive framing. So I think that kind of plays into balanced as well here, which is listed, which is this idea of like, we want to acknowledge the strengths and the efforts that the person put in before we really dive into those areas of improvement. And that can help create a more supportive and receptive environment where you're just really framing it as like, hey, this is not a shit sandwich, no. And it's not like something that you're just purely doing wrong and we're not bagging on you. It's what you're doing really well. And it's also like where you can get even better, because I value you as an employee and I appreciate you being here, and I want you to be at like your best possible place. And then also like with that plays in this idea of it's objective and it's fair. You don't want to have a subjective piece of feedback. If you perceive something and it might be marred by bias, like maybe take a minute to reflect on what that person's actual actions are, and just make sure that what you say has a positive intent and a good intent with that person. So you're again creating that environment of trust and safety and supportedness. And Namaste, I'll let you take the second half of this if you would like.
Sure. And actually, what's coming to mind for me right now is there's a technique called nonviolent communication. And within that, one of the key aspects is that we talk about our subjective experiences and we talk about objective like events or evidence. And so when talking about feedback, one of the things that I find really helpful is, I can say this is how I interpreted or this is how I experienced something that happened. And I can also say like when this happened or when you said this or did that, those are objective facts. And I don't want to project into somebody else what their intentions might have been or their thought processes or project my judgments on top of that. And so going into feedback with people, we can treat it with curiosity and be like, this was my experience of this objective event. What was your experience? Do you see it the same way? Because I found a lot of times, just like blind spots, receiving feedback, giving feedback as well, I often have blind spots. I don't have the whole picture. So bringing it to the table as something to collaboratively explore with curiosity often leads to a growing together, a connection, a strengthening of the relationship, and common ground that we can move forward together on. And that's where I've seen the most effective feedback occur.
Yeah, I love that. I think you brought up these thoughts of like when you focus on the behavior, not the person, and you keep that like objective, you avoid personal attacks. And that also builds that like empathy and that respect and that safe space. And I think like what that made me think of is like this idea that feedback is also a conversation, right? Like when
Yeah.
you give somebody feedback, it's not a monologue. It's not for you to just unload on them. It's also, you want to encourage that person to ask any questions, clarify any doubts they might have. share their thoughts and perspectives. You know, we don't want people like refuting your feedback and saying, oh, I didn't do that, this is how I did it. But like when you have this environment of like these feedback loops, then that person gets clarity on like, well, what exactly do you mean by I could improve this? Like, what are some things that you think might help me here? Because I really am doing my best and I kind of can't pull it out of nowhere. So like having that loop where you can talk about exactly how to get there is super helpful, and having that two-way street.
Great points by both of you. And I've really enjoyed just listening to just your answers and thoughts on all of these questions. And we do have a couple questions in the Q&A. But before we get to those, we have a quick commercial break. So like we talked about in this webinar, we are Bonusly. And so we really believe in recognition and the power it has to be one, positive feedback, but also to really help with recency bias when it comes to performance reviews, to help managers recognize their employees, especially when they see improvements. And so if you want any information, we're about to launch a poll. And if you would like a demo just to see how Bonusly can help your company and play into sort of the performance management system that you have now, please answer that poll. You know, in the topic of performance management reviews, you know, Bonusly is a great tool where you can pull a report of your direct reports, see all the recognition they had from the previous year, and bring that to the review. You know, you can see what they accomplished in January. You can see what they accomplished in the summer. You can see what they accomplished last week. And it really just helps make these performance reviews just really holistic. But also it's just a great tool to help managers just gain the insights of their teams, recognize their coworkers, and just for peer-to-peer recognition. And so we'd love to talk more about that. As you can see, we're all very passionate about recognition. And then I'll also drop our LinkedIn's. You know, we would love to connect. If you have any questions for us, if you have any just thoughts, I know there was a question about a book that Namaste referenced. So please feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to connect and just share more about our thoughts around this. And with that, we will jump into our Q&A section. And so our first question, and this will start with either of you, what steps can organizations take to address biases in performance assessment and feedback? That way it ensures fairness and objectivity.
So I think some of what you just plugged, David, around the Bonusly product, but really any way to collect evidence over time, I think is very powerful, because then you avoid recency bias. So anything where you're doing some ongoing collection, and not just from the manager, but by the direct report as well, like collect that over time. And if you have a way to make that easier and organic, all the better. And then also getting multiple perspectives. So it's not just the manager's assessment of a person's performance, but what are their peers' assessments, and what are other people in the organization? How do they see their work? What's that impact been? And a lot of the time, there's things that managers just don't see. We're not omnipotent. We have very limited time. I was almost late to this webinar as an example. So like, we're very human and we're very fallible. And so we need all the help we can get to fully understand the impact a person is having, and to make have a strong conversation around somebody's performance. So anything that can surface where their impact is happening throughout their workday, throughout their organization, and then track that over time, I think that's a very powerful way to collect evidence and combat bias.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. I think like, and if you're in the position of HR, just educating your managers on like how to do that, leverage the tools that you have, you know, get Bonusly so you can view the reports on like what people are doing well across the year, and really celebrating those things, and bringing some of, as like HR, bringing some of that standardization, so to make sure that every manager has the tools to do a performance review and look back at performance in an unbiased way. That's the best that we can do when we foster these cultures of transparency and accountability, so that everybody has the tools and the know-how of doing it the right way.
Awesome. And that really ties into sort of, it's Gallup came out with a recent research last week, which a lot of it really did focus around managers and how a lot don't have the training that they need. They don't have the tools that they need. And like Namaste mentioned, almost everybody in this work environment is doing more with less, but especially people managers, you know. I saw a chart recently where it's like a really big chunk of their time is just spent helping their direct reports, you know, helping with different tasks that they need, different needs that they have, and they rarely have time to get their tasks done. And so they really are stretched thin. And this next question, again, for either of you, but what are your thoughts on keeping the same performance managers versus switching them up?
I think there's pros to each of them. I won't say cons, but when you keep their same performance manager, you have like this continuity and trust, and then also like almost like institutional knowledge of what they've been doing over time. And then you have that strong relationship, right? So it makes it easier to have that performance view because you have a relationship and you have a deeper understanding of like how the employee has performed. And then the pros to switching it up is maybe that fresh perspective. Maybe if there is some bias happening, you can break that bias. And then there's exposure to different leadership styles. I think this could be especially beneficial if you're doing like a skip level here. But I think ultimately the decision is based on your individual employees, like what would they thrive under? If they feel very, very nervous to have a new performance manager, then maybe stick with the same one. But definitely a conversation to have, I would think.
Yeah, I'll back that up, Alessandra. It's very much situational. I think the two things are like that relationship is very important and very powerful, and it can grow and strengthen over time. So you don't want to discard that without consideration. But at the same time, maybe somebody's sort of topped out working with a manager or has an opportunity to grow and have a better fit somewhere else. And so really looking at what's best for the individual and their growth, and then making that determination based on that assessment.
Awesome. And that brings us almost to time. We'll pass it back to Kathy here in a second. But again, if any of you would like more information on Bonusly, make sure you answer that poll, because like they were just mentioning, you know, if you do switch managers, if a new manager does come in, you know, tools like Bonusly and tools that sort of keep track of what happened the entire year really help get rid of that recency bias. You know, a new manager can come in, look at what happened over the last year, and then ask questions, you know, like, oh, I saw you got so much recognition about this project. I saw you did this. I saw you're really good at this. And, you know, it really helps just avoid any of that unbiasedness that may come with switching managers. So again, connect with us, answer that poll. And it has been an absolute pleasure to be here with you all. And we will pass it back to Kathy to close us out and give you all the next steps before you head to the next webinar.
Thanks, David. This concludes our webcast today. I would like to thank all of our presenters, as well as all of you for joining us. If you joined in late and would like to view the webcast again, the recording and slides will be available on hr.com on our archived webcast page. Check your hr.com account for your credits. Those will arrive within 2 business days, and we also send out an email with the credit information. I would just like to remind the audience to fill out a quick feedback survey that will open on a new tab on your screen. It only takes a few minutes, and your valuable input is key to improving the quality of our webcasts. To join the next session, click on over to the hr.com event auditorium. We hope to see you there and enjoy the rest of the event.